The lawsuit arrived on a Thursday. I was standing on the porch of my house when a process server handed me an envelope with my parents' names across the top. Martin Vance and Sheila Vance. Plaintiffs. Me defendant. They were asking a Colorado court to impose an interest on my home because, according to them, I had broken a family agreement, the same agreement I had never made. 2 weeks earlier, Dad had looked me in the eye and said, "That house should go to your brother." I thought he was angry. I thought he was bluffing. Then I read the complaint. My parents weren't strangers claiming my house. They were the people who had actually sold it to me. My name is Elliot Vance. I was 37, single, and working as a senior civil engineering project manager outside Denver. I made a good living, but nobody had handed me one. I had spent years building savings, improving my credit, and waiting until buying a house actually made financial sense. The strange part was that the house my parents were now suing me over had once been a property they were desperate to get rid of. My parents, Martin and Sheila, had owned the Arvada house as a rental for about 11 years. By 2022, they were tired of being landlords. The roof was aging. The HVAC system was near the end of its life. There were drainage problems along one side of the foundation, an outdated electrical panel, and a kitchen that looked like it had stopped evolving sometime around 1998. Dad complained constantly about repair calls. Mom wanted the property sold before something expensive failed. At the same time, I was house hunting, so I asked a simple question. If you're selling anyway, would you sell it to me? They said yes, there was nothing secret about the transaction. An independent appraisal valued the property at roughly $458,000 in its existing condition. We agreed on $445,000. I put down about $89,000 from my own savings. I financed the remaining balance myself. My parents never co-signed, they were never placed on my mortgage, and after closing, their names were no longer on the deed. They received roughly $255,000 after the old loan and closing costs were paid. At my housewarming, Dad joked that somebody else could finally deal with the roof. Mom called it Elliot's place for nearly 4 years. Nobody mentioned a family ownership agreement. Nobody mentioned Trevor. Nobody said I might have to give the house back. Meanwhile, I spent about $92,000 replacing systems, correcting deferred maintenance, and improving the property. By the time its estimated value reached around $640,000, my parents stopped remembering the house as something they had sold. They started remembering it as something they had given me. Trevor's problems started about a year before the lawsuit. He was 40, married to Alana, and raising 2 kids, Lucas and Mira, for several years. Trevor had run a small commercial video and event production business. It was never huge, but it paid the bills. Then 2 major clients left within months of each other. Revenue dropped fast. The equipment loans didn't, by the following spring. Trevor shut the business down and took a salaried sales job with a local company. Alana still worked full-time as a nurse. They weren't homeless. They weren't starving. They were renting a townhouse and trying to rebuild their savings. But in my parents' minds, Trevor's situation became an emergency. He has 2 children. Mom kept saying, he needs stability. Dad added. I agreed. What I didn't agree with was their definition of who should provide it. At first, the comments were subtle. You have more flexibility than Trevor. You're doing well. You don't have kids depending on you. Then Dad started bringing up the Arvada house. Remember, we gave you a family price. That phrase bothered me. The house had appraised around $458,000 when I bought it. I paid $445,000. Yes, I got a favorable deal, but $13,000 below an as-is appraisal was not the same as being handed a house, especially after I spent roughly $92,000 fixing everything they had postponed for years. Then, one Sunday, Dad said something that made me realize how far the story had shifted. That place is worth what now, $640 approximately. And you paid us $445. That was 4 years ago. He smiled like he had just proven something. So we basically gave you almost $200,000 in equity. No, I said. That equity didn't exist when I bought it. He waved that away, to him. Current value had somehow become evidence of past generosity. A week later, Dad called and asked me to come over for a family meeting. I assumed they wanted to discuss helping Trevor with a down payment. Maybe they wanted me to recommend lenders. Maybe they wanted advice instead. Dad waited until I sat down, folded his hands, and said, "We need to discuss transferring the Arvada house." I honestly thought I had misunderstood him. Transferring it to who? Dad looked toward Trevor. "To your brother." I laughed once. Nobody else did. Mom leaned forward. "Elliot, be serious." "I am serious. That's my house." Dad's expression hardened. "That house should go to your brother." There it was, not a suggestion, not a request to help with a down payment. My parents wanted me to give up the home I had bought, renovated, and lived in for nearly 4 years because Trevor had children and I didn't. Their plan was for Trevor to take the house at roughly what I had paid in 2022, around $445,000 to $460,000. They talked about it like that was generous. It would have erased most of the appreciation and ignored nearly every dollar I had spent improving the property. "You can buy another house," Mom said. "Trevor needs this one." "Why this one?" "The schools are good," she said. "There's space for the kids. So because I'm one person, my home matters less." Dad shook his head impatiently. "This isn't about who matters more. It's about using family resources responsibly." "I bought that resource with a family price." Then Dad said something I had never heard before. "You agreed the house would stay available to the family." I stared at him. "No, I didn't." "Yes, you did. When we sold it." "Show me where." Dad's jaw tightened. "Not everything between family needs a contract." That was when I realized this wasn't just entitlement. They had built an entirely new version of the sale. Dad pulled out old text messages. One was from closing week. He had written, "Glad the house is staying in the family." I had replied, "Me too." Another conversation mentioned that family should always have somewhere to land if things got hard. To me, those were ordinary family comments to my parents. 4 years later, they had become evidence of a side agreement. "You sold me a house." I said, "You didn't retain the right to redistribute it." Dad stood up. "Then we'll let a judge decide." I thought it was another threat. 2 weeks later, I was served. The complaint accused me of breaking an oral family agreement and asked the court to impose an interest on my property. They had also filed a notice against the title. That was when I called Priya Desai, a civil litigation attorney who handled real estate disputes. She read the complaint carefully. Then she looked at me. "They're making an aggressive claim," she said. "But if they say there was a promise before closing, we make them prove every word of it." She tapped the complaint. "And to do that, they're going to have to open their own files too." Discovery started with the numbers my parents had been repeating to everyone. According to Dad, they had practically gifted me the house. According to the actual appraisal, they hadn't. Priya slid the 2022 report across the conference table. "As is value," she said, tapping the page. $458,000. I had paid $445,000, $13,000 below appraisal, not $200,000, not some life-changing family sacrifice, and the appraisal had been based on the condition before I replaced anything. The inspection report was even better. Old roof, aging HVAC, drainage problems, electrical corrections, deferred maintenance everywhere. Then came my invoices: roof, heating and cooling, windows, drainage, electrical work, kitchen updates. By the time Priya totaled everything, I had put roughly $92,000 into the property after closing. "They're trying to claim today's equity as yesterday's gift," she said. That sentence stayed with me because that was exactly what they were doing. The current value had become evidence, in their minds, that they had somehow created wealth for me 4 years earlier. Then we opened the closing file. Purchase agreement, settlement statement, recorded deed, mortgage documents. There was no buyback clause, no right of first refusal, no retained ownership interest, no condition saying I had to sell to Trevor, nothing requiring me to transfer the house back if my parents later decided somebody else needed it more. They had signed the sale. They had received the proceeds. They had walked away from ownership. Still, Priya warned me not to get comfortable. "Your father is going to argue the written documents don't reflect the whole understanding." Then she found the email. 6 days after closing, Dad had written his accountant, "We finally sold the Arvada rental to Elliot. Please take it off our rental schedule going forward. Glad to be done being landlords." I read it twice. He hadn't written that for a judge. He hadn't written it during a family fight. He had written it when nobody expected the sale to become a lawsuit. Then we found Mom's text from a few weeks later. "It feels strange that it's completely yours now, but I'm happy it stayed with someone who loves it. Completely yours." Priya printed both messages. Then Trevor sat for his deposition. "Did Elliot ever personally promise you this house?" Priya asked. "No." "Did he ever tell you he would transfer it if you had financial trouble?" "No." "So everything you believed about this agreement came from your parents?" Trevor hesitated, then said, "Yes." After that, Priya gave them an exit. "Dismissed the case with prejudice, released the title notice. Everyone pays their own fees. No public fight." I agreed. Dad refused. His response was simple. A judge should hear what family means. That was the moment this stopped being a misunderstanding. The day Dad rejected that offer, Priya closed the settlement folder. "We gave them a clean exit," she said. "Now we move for summary judgment." That meant asking the judge to decide the property claims without a full trial because the evidence no longer supported the agreement my parents said existed. I authorized it. Around that same time, Trevor called me. He sounded different. Alana saw the deposition documents, and she asked me why I ever thought the house was ours. I said nothing. Trevor admitted that Mom and Dad had told him the matter was already handled. He and Alana had even discussed school routes and which bedroom Lucas might use. "Why didn't you call me?" I asked. He took a long breath. "Because I wanted to believe them." Then he said something I respected more than any excuse. "I wanted to believe them because their version ended with me getting a house." Alana had already told him they were not taking a property I legally owned. Trevor told our parents to stop using his family as the reason for the lawsuit. They continued anyway. Months later, we walked into court for the summary judgment hearing. My parents' attorney argued that the lower purchase price, our family relationship, and those old texts proved there had been an understanding. Priya started with one question. "Discounted from what?" She handed up the original appraisal. $458,000. My purchase price was $445,000. Then came the closing documents showing my parents received their proceeds. Then nearly $92,000 in improvements I had paid for afterward. "The plaintiffs are comparing a 2022 purchase price to a 2026 property value," Priya said. "They are trying to claim today's equity as yesterday's gift." Then she turned to Dad's email. 6 days after closing, we finally sold the Arvada rental to Elliot. Priya asked Dad, "When you told your accountant you had sold the property, were you lying?" "No." "Did you tell your accountant you retained an ownership interest?" "No." "Did you record one?" "No." "Did Elliot sign one?" "No." Dad shifted in his seat. "We had a family understanding." Priya paused. "Where is it Dad had no document?" Then came Mom's message. "It feels strange that it's completely yours now." Priya asked whether that statement had been true when she sent it. Mom quietly said yes. That was the moment their case stopped being about an agreement and became what it had really been all along. Regret. The judge's ruling was calm. Family expectations. Later, financial hardship. And changed circumstances did not create an ownership interest that the evidence failed to establish. Summary judgment was granted in my favor. The notice clouding my title was ordered released. The house remained mine. I thought that would be the end. Priya reminded the court that months earlier. My parents had been offered a dismissal where everyone absorbed their own legal expenses. By then, they already had the appraisal, the closing documents, their own contradictory messages, and Trevor's testimony. They had chosen to continue, after separate consideration. The court ordered them to reimburse roughly $36,000 in qualifying later-stage legal fees and costs. It didn't bankrupt them. It wasn't supposed to. My nuclear revenge wasn't finding some hidden crime or trying to destroy my parents. It was stopping them from walking away free after their own records proved they had sued me over a promise I never made. Outside the courthouse, Dad caught up with me. "You didn't have to go after our money." I looked at him. I gave you a way out where nobody paid mine." He stared at me. "You chose the hearing. My parents stayed in their home. Nobody went bankrupt. Nobody went to jail. They simply had to pay part of the cost of a lawsuit they had chosen to continue after their own evidence contradicted them." Trevor and Alana renewed their townhouse lease for another year. They cut expenses, rebuilt their savings, and eventually bought a smaller house they could actually afford. I didn't contribute to the down payment. Trevor didn't ask. Months after the case ended, he called me. "I should have talked to you before I started imagining my kids in those bedrooms." Yes, I let Mom and Dad's version become true because I liked the outcome. That apology mattered. It didn't erase everything. But it was honest. Our relationship became civil again. Not close, not hostile, just different. Mom eventually tried to explain. "We thought family should benefit from that house." I looked at her. "I am family. Dad said they had only been trying to protect Trevor." "No," I said. "You were trying to solve his problem with something you had already sold." After that, I stopped mixing family expectations with financial decisions. No vague promises, no implied obligations, no assumption that being single made my property more negotiable. And I kept the house, not as a trophy, not as revenge. I kept it because it was mine. My parents believed Trevor's need gave them the right to rewrite a sale they had willingly signed years earlier. It didn't. I never took anything from them. I never tried to punish my brother. I simply defended the home I had bought, paid for, and improved with my own money. The strangest part was that my parents were right about one thing. The house had stayed in the family. They just forgot that I counted. If your parents sold you a house, watched you build equity in it, then sued to give it to your sibling, could you ever trust them again? Tell me what you would have done, and subscribe for more family betrayal stories.